Thank you for joining us in this beautiful spring Sunday morning. Nice weather outside and inside as well. Great company. Today we will cover a portion of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, so please take the next few moments to open up your Bibles or your gadgets. And if none of those things apply to you, just look to the projection, and that will do as well. Or you can just listen to me. I know I have a nice soothing voice, sometimes way too soothing, and people have a tendency to doze off. But it's not you, it's me. Again, way too soothing. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 from verse 1 to verse 13. That is our goal for today. And again, as you're finding your place, let me just transition a little bit from what we covered last week in the previous chapter to now this new chapter. And this is especially important because if we don't do this sort of transition, chapter 10 almost looks like a totally different subject matter, topic that is disconnected with what we've already discussed before. So hopefully you remember, especially if you were here, that on chapter 9, Paul was utilizing the illustration of a race or of an athlete that does whatever it takes to win the prize, win first place, right? And part of that dedication, part of that sacrifice has to do with not indulging, not taking advantage of things that most other people take advantage of, because that athlete knows that often the difference between first place and first loser, otherwise known as second place, it's just a second or half a second or whatever. So the athlete needs all the advantages that he or she can get, and because of that, maybe, again, doesn't eat certain types of foods, doesn't have a lot of leisure time, always working out, always focused upon the task at hand. But all of that is worth it based on Paul's illustration, because he knows that there is a crown to be had, a crown that is not perishable, something that is rather eternal. So again, he is transitioning from this idea now into chapter 10, and chapter 10 essentially is another illustration that fits into that. So what we will see in chapter 10 is Paul utilizing the Israelite history, right? The people that came before and the things that happened to those people, and he wants to continue to emphasize this idea of being willing to sacrifice to achieve a particular goal, paying the price to attain that medal or that crown, winning the race at all costs. So again, that's what we have in store for us. Let me go ahead and read all the way through, and you can follow along, and then we take it, one section at a time, as we usually do. Starting from verse 1, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of the spiritual rock that followed them. That rock was Christ. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now, these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And do not become idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, And in one day 23,000 fell, nor let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed by serpents. Nor complain, as some of them also complained, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now, all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you except such as it is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Amen. So let's tackle the first few verses, the first 5 verses exactly. Again, Paul is transitioning from this illustration of an athlete, someone who is sacrificing it all to win that singular prize, that medal, the top of the podium. And now he transitions to talk about the Israelite history. So what is exactly the connection here based on the verbiage and the things that Paul mentioned? Well, it is very likely, if we do a little bit of hermeneutical reverse engineering, and oftentimes when you do Bible studies or you try to figure out the reasons why Paul or any other biblical author is saying certain things, you kind of have to read between the lines. And it seems like Paul was trying to confront a notion that people would have had. In other words, again, his argument was, you sacrifice everything for that one prize. And then people might have thought, well, is that really necessary, Paul? Is it just that one singular thing that we need? Aren't we, as the church of Christ, the Corinthians, don't we already take advantage of the blessings of God? Don't we partake in certain ceremonies, certain rites, such as baptism, certain blessings, such as communion, partaking in the bread and in the wine, which obviously illustrates, Christ's sacrifice for us? Aren't we blessed already? Do we need to do all of this busybody work to achieve that one prize? We are already blessed. We are already taking advantage of everything that Jesus has for us. So maybe we've already won the prize, and we don't need to sacrifice or work very hard. And it's sort of like that idea that I mentioned to you, that nowadays everybody wins a trophy. And if everyone wins a trophy, even before they play the game, or even before they actually compete, what's the point of working very hard or competing in such a manner that you're going to try to excel and to achieve that goal? So maybe to the Corinthians, they thought, we've already won the prize. We already have our participation trophy. We partake in all of these blessings and all of these rights that Jesus has bestowed upon us. Then maybe, quite possibly, we can just go and do our thing on our own pace. Whatever we like to do, because it really doesn't matter. So, thinking about this possibility, Paul is now trying to utilize their ancestry of sorts and their history to illustrate a very important point. And what is this very important point? Just because someone or certain people experience certain blessings, it does not necessarily mean that God is actually pleased with them, that they have the complete favor from God. God is gracious, God is good, and very often He gives us things and to enjoy that we do not deserve. And even those things, as we are enjoying, taking pleasure in, or advantage of, it really does not mean that God is completely in favor of what we are doing. So let's see how this plays out here. Paul says from verse 1, "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea." Verse 2, "All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea." So again, Paul is utilizing certain analogies and illustrations here. Obviously, he's talking about the period of time in their history that they were wandering in the wilderness, and he states certain facts that were very well known. Because they were in the desert, roaming around during the day, God manifested himself like a cloud during the day so that they would be sheltered from the sun. Again, favor. Seems like God was very pleased with them to the point where he was literally this umbrella of sorts so they would not get sunburned. And then the opposite during the night, where that presence of God would be manifested into sort of a cloud of fire to guide their way and their path. So it seems like God was with them all along, doing everything possible to bless them. And then he goes on to kind of include this idea of baptism. Obviously here, the analogy is when they crossed the sea. In a way, Paul is saying that was sort of like a baptism of sorts. The children of Israel were baptized, much like you were baptized. Isn't that great? They were blessed in this manner that you were blessed with. This right, this religious right that you take advantage of, that you partake in, they also took advantage of and had. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Verse 3, all ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them. That rock was Christ Jesus. Again, adding to the analogy. You guys partake in communion, the Lord's Supper, the bread, the wine. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a beautiful thing. It is a blessing from above. It is a opportunity to contemplate everything that Jesus has done for you and so much more. What a blessing it is. Guess what? They also, in a way, took advantage of that. They had the manna. They had the water. They drank from it. They ate from it. Not only was it something physical, but it also was something spiritual. They had the rock, which is Jesus, that followed you along. And this is where kind of Paul's analogy breaks down, right? Because Moses hit the rock. But I don't think he was thinking about that. But fact of the matter is, they were blessed. God was giving them things. They were baptized. They ate. They drank of spiritual food. They were covered literally by God's protection and direction. So it must have meant that God was completely in favor, right, of them. That God was completely accepting of all of their conduct. Everything they did. Well, verse 5. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. This is the point that Paul is trying to make. Don't think that just because you feel certain blessings from God, you experience certain benefits from God, that God is actually pleased with you, because he was not pleased with them, with most of them, which is actually sort of portraying a very positive picture, right? Because outside of Caleb and Joshua and Moses and maybe a couple other people, God was actually not pleased with most all of them. Yet, again, they experienced all of these things. Paul is trying to say, try your hardest to achieve the prize. Don't think that you've already earned it. Don't think that you already made it. Don't think that you've already crossed the finish line. There is more to achieve. Continue to strive and dedicate yourself and sacrifice, withholding certain benefits if those things are not going to help you to achieve this goal. So those are the examples that they had. So again, the connection seems clear. But now as we go on to verse 6, Paul will now talk about certain bad examples, if you will. Certain things that the Israelites did that the church should not do or follow in their examples. Paul has already mentioned about the blessings. That did not necessarily mean that God was in favor of them all. And now he's going to talk about the things, the sinful things that they did so that the church would not follow in those same things and learn from their mistakes. So he says here on verse 6, now these things became our example, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. So this is just a general assessment of sorts. The things that the Hebrews did during those 40 years as they were roaming around the desert. They lusted over things that were not acceptable to God. And then he's going to specify what were the things that they lusted over or did. He says on verse 7, and do not become idolaters, as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. This reference of sitting down to eat and drink and rose up to play, it's an idea of business as usual. And it's within the context when the people were sinning against God. How were they sinning against God? Remember when Moses went up the mountain, received the 10 Commandments, and people were thinking, well, he's taking way too long. Let's make an idol. Let's make a god. And they gathered up, all of these precious metals and then just made this golden calf so that they could worship it and adore it. And then God was aware of all of this and then told Moses and said, hey, look at what they're doing down there. And then there's this reference where business as usual. Just wake up and do the things that you normally do, even while you are committing idolatry. And then he goes on to say, nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. So here is another reference of the lusts that they experienced. There was a portion or a period of time when the men, right? Way to go, men. A lot likely to do this than women. But they actually sought after the daughters of Moab. They lusted after them. They wanted to just connect with them spiritually, sexually, physically, to the point where it became such an issue that a great number of people had to be wiped out in a very severe way. He goes on to say, nor let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed by serpents. A very well-known portion of their history, when they were complaining and complaining and complaining, and God was, finally fed up, and then he sent these serpents to go and bite them, and they were perishing, and then they started crying out, and then a bronze sculpture or statue or an image of a serpent was made, and they had to look upon it for their salvation, very symbolic of Jesus, because, it was propped up, and they have to gaze upon it. But again, Paul is making this analogy or this connection that they were actually doing something against Jesus. They, as it is stated here, let us not tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, in the sense of just complaining, bickering, not acknowledging what they had, always looking at the glass being half filled, what is lacking, what they want in addition to what they have, not understanding the big picture. Do not tempt Christ, he says. And then he summarizes this portion by saying, now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Before that, he said that they were destroyed by the destroyer. So again, their history now is being displayed here. And he's saying, you are actually not in a position that is that much different than they were. They were blessed. They took advantage of many things from God, and it did not mean that they were actually pleasing God. They did some horrible things and were punished because of that. And if you do these similar things, you will also share in the same fate. And here is your history. Here is your story. Learn from it. And why do we learn history? There are many reasons why we should learn history. Part of that is simply so we do not make the same mistakes as we have in the past. And now, Paul, after establishing these truths, right, and telling them about their own history, which they were already, they knew it already. He's applying it in a very particular way, but none of these things were new or novel. They were not shocked to hear any of these things. Now he's going to, in a more practical way, give them certain insights and certain tools so that they do not end up like these people that he mentioned or talked about. And here he's going to coin this lesson and these tools in a way that gives them enough insight not to fall into temptation. Because again, that's the gist of it all. As you are running this race, and those of you who have ever ran, whether we're talking about down the street, a block, half a mile, couple of miles, half a marathon, a full-on marathon, on and on and on. What happens as you are running? What does your body tell you? What is the temptation? Are you crazy? What are you doing to yourself? You were there sitting down on your couch just a couple of hours ago. Such a joyous time. Feeling good. No pain, no sorrow, no heartache. Just completely comfortable. And out of the blue, you decide to get off the couch and start torturing yourself. The pain that you're going through right now. Needless. Why are you doing? Who are you trying to impress? You don't need this. You don't want this. It really will not make a difference. Come on. I know you had set in your mind to run a certain distance, but you don't really need to achieve that goal. We all know that it doesn't really matter, so just stop. Stop a third of the way. Oh, you've made it halfway? Most of the way? That is completely fine. Stop right here. Walk back. Take a break. You do not need to kill yourself. Temptation. Your body is instigating you or trying to make you veer off or stop before you've actually achieved that goal. And Paul gives us insights as to how to fight against temptation. And essentially, think of temptation as somewhat of an invitation, right? Again, whether we're talking about if we're running or any other, idea related to being tempted, think of temptation as an invitation of sorts. Now, all of us, we all receive invitations, right? The most usual ones, well-known ones, are the ones that you receive a little postcard in the mail, or they're handed to you. Maybe it's a birthday party. Maybe it's a wedding ceremony. Maybe it's a graduation of sorts, or a party in general. But even besides those things, your inbox, your email inbox is probably flooded with invitations, right? Sometimes they go directly to the trash bin because you know that many other people have received those invitations and they're bogus, they're phony, right? You receive those invitations of the Nigerian prince that for whatever reason you are related to him because, I don't know, you've never been to Nigeria, but part of the family. And there's this inheritance that they've researched all around the globe. And you are the next of kin, the closest relative. And you have this money just waiting for you. It's in the bank account, and all that is needed is your information. That is it. That is the invitation. Very enticing. Now, obviously, you have to pay taxes ahead of time, right? So you have to send them a certain amount of money, fees, if you will. And once you do that, for sure, you will receive your inheritance, invitation. Now, it seems kind of silly, even though, bear in mind, some people actually fall for that till this day. And other things related to that type of scam. Invitation. So again, we are all invited to things all the time. Some of these invitations are very enticing, right? Maybe you really do want to go to that birthday party. Maybe you want to spend 3 hours in the sun waiting for that letter of that person who is graduating. Usually it's in alphabetical order, and God forbid his name starts with a Z. But maybe you really want to be there for that special occasion or a wedding or a party or whatever. And those invitations are very enticing to you. And you just, regardless of what you have in your schedule, you really want to go. Or certain other invitations are not very enticing. They're not very tempting. You could care less. You don't want to go. You don't want the inheritance. It doesn't do a thing for you. So again, we are all invited. And we are all enticed to do various different things. Certain things really tug at our emotions, within our feelings, what we want. Other things couldn't even mean any less. We could care less. But regardless of all of this, Paul gives us insights as to how to deal with these invitations. Because ultimately, temptation is not just an invitation, it's actually an invitation to objectively practice something. What is it that we are objectively trying to practice when we are invited in the sense of being tempted? We are being invited to somehow distort or redefine a revealed truth from God. Again, that's the invitation. We know the truth. This truth comes from God. And what do I mean by truth coming from God? I personally believe that if anything is a truth, then it is a truth from God. Oftentimes, we have a tendency to make this dichotomy in our lives between things that are spiritual and things that are secular, things that are perfectional, things that are social, things that are part of our family reality. But regardless of that, if it is a truth, whether you think it's just a societal norm, if it is a truth that comes from God. Whether you think it's some rules that you have to abide by in a classroom, an educational environment. If it is a truth that comes from God. Maybe it's some legal standard. If it is truthful, it is a truth from God. Again, in the professional arena, in your family life, if it is a truth, it is a truth from God. And what is the temptation? We know these truths. We know these realities. They have been clearly revealed to us. The temptation is, let's redefine them a little bit. Let's ever so slightly distort them. Why do we do this? Why are we enticed to do this? Paul actually starts off by explaining the main agent of this. He says on verse 12, therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he falls. What he's talking about here is pride. The reason why the distortion of God's truth is so enticing, the redefinition, the attempt to redefine God's truth, the reason why it is so appealing to us, it is because of pride. Basically, what we think is our version of that truth is so much better than God's version, so much more applicable, comfortable. It fits more with my reality. So again, I'm not going to totally reject it. Maybe every once in a while I do that. But most of the time, I just want to adjust it to fit my own needs and my desires and my own reality. So we are invited to do this. What should we do? How can we be aware of what is happening when that comes to be? Again, Paul is teaching about this phenomenon that we all face. And he starts off verse 13 by saying, no temptation has overtaken you except such that is common to man. What does that mean? Oftentimes, whenever we are tempted, whenever we are invited to do something that we know we should not do, to change that truth, that norm that comes from above, that is godly. Oftentimes, we kind of dwell on our experience and our struggles, and it almost seems like we're in an island, and we are the only ones who are facing that. We are isolated, and we say, why me? Why am I always receiving this invitation? Can't somebody else receive it? Why is it always me and it's just me? It doesn't seem like anyone else is experiencing this. Paul says, baloney. Common to all men. Everyone experiences this. The only difference is some people indulge and other people ignore. And you'll talk about that a little bit later on as far as what we should do. But the actual experience of temptation is common to all men. Even Jesus himself experienced temptation, which leads us to believe that that is not the sinful part. That is common to all men. Look around the room. Actually, before you look around the room, think about it. Think about that temptation. Or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. You know who you are. You know what you struggle with. The fact of the matter is, we all struggle. But think about a few of those, at least. Now look around to your left, to your right, back side of the room. Go for it. Twist your neck. Now look at me. Yes. Stare into my soul. All of us, y'all face those very same struggles. You are not alone. It is not just you. The devil is not just picking on you or your own selfish, evil, sinful desires that you only experience. It is common to all who are here, all who are outside. Everyone experiences those things. Knowing this, what else does Paul say? No temptation has overtaken you except such as it is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. Paul establishes a very important truth. God is faithful. And how is his faithfulness manifested within this phenomenon called temptation? He establishes limits. In other words, he is aware of every single one of our weaknesses and our strengths individually and communally. And not only is he aware, he is very active. He is not passive in the sense of just, standing back and watching, the train wreck occur, right? When you know it's inevitable and it's going to happen and you just kind of flinch. He's active. He is aware. And he knows how far that can go. And he establishes limitations because he knows that beyond this point, then there is no control. There's nothing that we can do. There is no way that we can fight. And he does not allow us to experience such level of temptation that we cannot withstand. Very important truth. Why? Because every once in a while we think, I've been tempted, and it's not even a stumble. You nosedive into it because you've already been tempted and it is a lost cause. It's crossed your mind. You try not to think about it, and you are successful for a few days, maybe a few weeks, maybe, if you're really godly, a few months. But here it is. It came to your mind again, or you thought about it. But now, it's a losing cause. You've already lost because you're tempted, and you have no control over that. Another baloney. God established limitations. Regardless of how enticing that invitation is, regardless of how it kind of, how manipulative it may seem, how strong that specific issue may be in your own personal reality and struggles, you can withstand it. That is a fact. Because God is involved. How so? God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape. This idea of making a way of escape, the actual word in the original, it's a compound word. In other words, it's made out of multiple words, right? And essentially, escape means walking out. That's what it means, walking out. God gives you a way to walk out, to escape, to flee. And the best example, maybe not the best, but to me the most clear example of how this actually happens in real life is that story between Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Remember that story? Very well-known story. Joseph being a strapping young man, full head of hair probably, muscular, nice tan, maybe 6 foot tall, charming, great smile. Came from a good family, just a great guy. Potiphar's wife. Don't need to illustrate who she was. We can fill in a blank. She was attracted by this strapping young man. She wanted him for herself. She would try to reel him in, to entice him so that he would fall into the temptation. What did Joseph do? Did Joseph go to Potiphar's wife and say, hey, let's have a talk. Come sit down here in this nook area where the lighting is just right, just between you and me. Let's have a talk. Let's have a long, drawn-out conversation about this. So, marital counseling of sorts. Let's talk about this. Your husband is actually a great guy. You really should be focusing on him, not on me. Is that what Joseph did? Or did he try to, somehow make himself less attractive? Right? Some type of ploy to change her mind, going out of his way. What did he do? What did he do? The Bible's pretty clear that the answer to that temptation was pretty simple. It's something that all people can do. He fled. He ran away. That is it, and that is all. Doesn't it seem over simplistic? Wouldn't you want even something more, right? Something, because even animals flee. It doesn't take that much to flee. But that's the answer. It seems like this is the primary answer to the topic or the subject matter or the issue of temptation. It's just flee. Run away. As soon as you are experiencing that, change the channel. Change the thought. Walk away. Don't try to indulge in it. Don't try to even, fight it in a very act. Just run away. Go away. Walk away. That's way too simple. There has to be more, but there isn't. And sometimes I think we get caught up on wanting something a lot more extravagant, more spiritual, some type of just, insight that is counterintuitive and again, just blows your mind. Oh, this is how you do it, the 10-step program? Run away, walk away. Get away from it immediately. That's how you deal with temptation. You receive that invitation in the mail. You don't know what it is? You kind of peek. You rip it up and you throw it in the trash. You delete it. You ignore it. You walk away. That's how you deal with temptation. That's how you win the race. Because again, internally speaking and externally speaking, the devil and our own sinful intentions and desires of our hearts, we are always going to be pulled into wanting to distort God's truths, wanting to redefine them for our own pleasure. When that happens, walk away, run away, ignore it, and continue to race, sacrificing yourselves and ourselves to achieve and receive that ultimate goal of pleasing our God in a way that is honorable to Him and beneficial for